In today's video, I would like to cover a piece of information that we initially reported on about a week after the event and then just kind of let it be. But now that we have the information from both the supplemental report and the final report, I think it's going to be very illustrative to the story being completely false coming out of the Navy. Now, the video at the top, of course, I'm sure a lot of you have seen. The number 3 video, of course, talks about the missile flight that we covered. And the number 4 talks about the bridge audio from the USS Porter and how we saw clearly that in the event of an actual collision, the collision alarm would sound pretty much indefinitely and general quarters would be sounded right away. But this number 2 video here, the number 2 viewed video, talks about this sailor, or excuse me, the mother of a sailor, saying that her son had been one of the ones diving into the water, into the flooded areas to retrieve or look for other sailors that had been left behind, while other sailors hurried to, quote, man the guns, unquote. Now, at the time, you thought, well, there was obviously a lot of collision. Nobody really knew what was going on. Nobody was paying attention. The collision came out of nowhere. That was the idea at the time, that this was a surprise to the Fitzgerald. Well, now that we know it's not a surprise, this makes absolutely no sense for this being just some random accident and collision due to poor seamanship. Now, if you want to, you can do a search of just a certain period in time, like this, June 12 to June 30, and you can find these results. Now, I searched man the guns Fitzgerald, and it was reported in multiple media outlets, both left wing and right wing. We had Baltimore Sun, Navy Times, New York Times, New York Post, Boston Globe, Daily Wire, CBS News, all reported this. So this wasn't some one-off. You know, this was something where it was reported that this woman had said this, that her son had reported this to her. Now, this was also, remember, before, I do believe, the NDAs came out. And then, since that time, don't you find it odd that there hasn't been one single sailor from the Fitzgerald say one word about anything that happened to any news outlet anywhere? Of all the 300, not one word from any one of them. I mean, we saw after the Porter, there was an officer and there was an enlisted man that both talked to their local news media about, boy, you know, it was something that kind of came out of nowhere, but we tried to come together and we got things squared away, and, you know, very clearly talking about just an accident. And we're almost going to be almost a year in a couple months here, and not a single word from one sailor at all, other than this one reported through the mom that came out before the non-disclosure agreements. Now, the reason this idea of manning the guns is so silly is this. The preliminary report deals with everything after 1:30, after the collision. The final report that came out in November deals with everything before. Now, here, it talks about Fitz sounds collision alarm for 2 seconds. Sets general quarters 13 minutes later, and in this report you can read that it was actually the DCA who was asleep that set general quarters. Nobody aboard the bridge set general quarters. That alone, that one piece of information right there, shows me clearly that something else was going on. There is no way, especially when we have in the report that the junior officer of the deck and the officer of the deck were both keenly aware of the proximity and the course and the speed of the crystal. That wasn't something that came up on them, you know, last minute. There was discussion. So this wasn't some giant surprise. and that we have a report that sailors were manning the guns might tell me that this was an attack and that this crew knew it was an attack. And that initially they did respond as if they were under attack. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine, and guardsmen operate based on training. They don't just randomly haphazard do things. Training, 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 always. No matter what happens in the military, there is a training scenario for it. We have an SOP, standard operating procedure. It's the way things are done. You don't go off on your own. Nobody would have gone off to man the guns on their own based on no information. Especially when general quarters hadn't been sounded. You know, somebody would have figured that out. That that the officers aboard that were watchstanding literally watched the collision happen right in front of them in real time, allegedly, with complete command and control of their ship, and didn't call general quarters, even though we know one MC was working. It didn't go down immediately at the point of collision. They would have set general quarters immediately if they would have had the ability to. And that it took someone below decks who was asleep to report to central control and then set general quarters, that tells me something completely different was going on aboard that bridge. And it wasn't just poor training. It wasn't just poor training. We know, we can see it in the report here, that we had a junior officer of the deck that was aware of it. The officer of the deck was aware of it. They had a radar track on it. They saw it coming. This was no surprise. So there wouldn't have been this confusion that would have erroneously led sailors to go man the guns. I'm very much wondering now if there actually was an attempt to board or success boarding the Fitz, which would have explained the delay in reporting. It very much would have. Because if you think about it, if the people on the bridge were fighting people off, they wouldn't have had the ability to call general quarters. If there were people on board that vessel that weren't supposed to be aboard that vessel, it would explain this whole idea of not doing a watch standing on the starboard side, but only doing a watch standing on the port side. That would have been the CYA for if they boarded from the starboard side. And it would explain the complete, contradiction in statement here, where they show the junior officer of the deck physically sighting the crystal, which was on the starboard side. But then in the report stating that nobody actually did watch standing on that side, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely the most ridiculous story I've ever heard in my life. They would have had one MC. They would have been able to call general quarters immediately, but no one aboard the bridge did. Not 13 minutes later. Someone else below decks did. And that there was a report of sailors manning the guns might have been to repel a boarding party. Or a boarding party might have been aboard, gotten a hold of something, and that they were attempting to interdict them as they fled. There's all sorts of things that could have happened here. This is all speculation at this point, but this story is bogus. It's absolutely bogus, and there's literal proof in their own report for it being bogus. It argues with itself. This idea of manning the guns. Why would anyone have manned the guns? Seems like a very loose term. I mean, if you have a general quarters, if you're duty station at General Quarters is one of the guns, you wouldn't have had General Quarters called until 13 minutes after. By that time, clearly, someone would have let you know that it was a collision, and a collision alarm was sounded for 2 seconds. But both could have been true. It was a collision that was an attack. Just like this channel has said from day one, that there's no way a cargo ship snuck up on a destroyer and accidentally, just oopsie-daisy, ran into it. It's baloney. And they have tried to change the news cycle over and over and over again to not have anyone talk about this. They've tried to slime our sailors. The most disgusting thing to me was Savage, Michael Savage. I thought for sure when I reported on this, finally someone is going to stand up. And all it was for him was a political tool. Because he watched his numbers go down and down and down and down and down. Because, of course, there wasn't an administration to club anymore. And he found another club to hit the last administration with, and that was his only motivation. Didn't care about the sailors, didn't care about honoring their service, didn't care about vindicating them, didn't care about reporting the truth that a Navy vessel had been attacked. Nope. The only thing he wanted to do was club the last administration. And once he got his little setup to say that, poof, done talking about it. Just like everybody else was. This was the only channel on YouTube that talked about this regularly and investigated it. Maybe if the actual people that call themselves truthers, quote unquote, had actually been worried about the actual truth, not their version of it, maybe this story would have gotten out. Maybe somebody else would have picked it up. But I'm still going to talk about it. I'm still going to try to honor these sailors and show clearly that there was a lie, a giant lie. 17 sailors are dead. And all of a sudden now we're best friends with the North Koreans. We're going to sit down and have the current version of a beer summit with one of the worst dictators the world has ever known. Anyway, didn't want to get into politics about this, but it's just so beyond ridiculous, the story that no one else is talking about but this little 12,000 subscriber channel. Nobody's even tried to pick it up. Anyway, I'll let you guys have your weekend. Thank you so much for the support. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you next time.